I do believe I'm probably going to press the record button. Is that correct, Joe?
I got the recording, Mike. Thanks.
All right, let's do this. I'm assuming it's recording. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to this week's Huddle. I'm your host, Mike Fondario, and I am flying solo today, y'all. So there are a lot of experts and a lot of experience on this call. So do not hesitate to contribute any comment or opinion you so choose, even if you happen to disagree with me, which actually makes the call a little more fun. Today, we are going to cover a few topics. We're going to do a broad review of seller disclosures, not only in the REPSI, the document itself, though we're not going to go into deep detail, as well as some seller's disclosures and warranties on the listing agreement. We are also going to review, because these things have come up, ownership interest disclosure for your listing agreements. And if we have time, there's two other things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about pricing adjustments and how you have those conversations, and maybe some of the information that you need to pull in order to correctly display the circumstances. And if we even have time after that, we can do a review of the buyer due diligence checklist, which is closely associated with seller's disclosures. So without further ado, let's jump right in. All right, first thing I want to talk about, I want to go over the seller's disclosures section in detail in the purchase contract. So let's do that. All right, you should be seeing the paragraph 7 of your real estate purchase contract. If it doesn't look familiar, I think we need to sit down and have a talk. But that should look fairly familiar to you. And let's jump right in. Let's read it line for line. Paragraph 7, seller's disclosures. No later than the seller's disclosure deadline referenced in section 24A, seller shall provide the buyer the following documents in hard copy or electronic format, which are collectively referred to as the seller's disclosures. And before we jump in, seller's disclosures, this is a really good time to remind everyone, the seller's disclosures are not just simply the seller's property condition disclosure. I do catch us, and even I do sometimes, referencing seller's disclosures as that single document, but seller's disclosures are a package of documents potentially, right? All right, paragraph 7A, a written seller property condition disclosure for the property completed, signed, and dated by seller as provided in section 10.3. B, a lead-based paint disclosure and acknowledgement for the property completed, signed, and dated by seller only if the property was built prior to 1978. And C, a commitment for title insurance as referenced in section 6.1. D, a copy of any restrictive covenants, CC&Rs, rules, and regulations affecting the property, a copy of the most recent minutes, budget, and financial statements for the homeowners association, if any, and a copy of any short-term rental booking schedule as the seller's disclosure deadline for the guests of the property after closing. And yes, I am going in the incorrect order. And F, a copy of any long-term tenant lease and rental agreements affecting the property not expiring prior to closing. A copy of any existing property management agreements, evidence of any water rights or shares referenced in section 1.4, written notice of any claims and or conditions known to seller relating to environmental problems and building or zoning code violations. And K, in general, the sale or, this is FERPTA, I'm going to just skip over that. And I, other is a catch-all. So question for the audience, which of these things, so we all know that the seller's property condition disclosure deadline and the seller's disclosure deadline is usually within a short period of time of us going under contract. Just by putting them in the chat, those who have a free keyboard, what would you say in your transactions the average timeline for the seller's disclosure deadline is? 3 days, 5 days, 7 days? Scott says 2 to 5 days. Leslie says 3. Kelly 3 to 5. Seems there's a Bob Stark says 10 to 14. Bob, would you mind saying why yours are longer? And you are muted, my good
Am I
Jacob.
unmuted? Can you hear
There you
me?
go. There you go.
Yeah, a lot of my properties are involved with HOAs, and getting a hold of these CCNRs in minute meetings take a while, and so I just always ask for a little more time.
Okay. Good reason. Uh, uh, yeah, Leslie says, yeah, that's what we see as an average. Yeah. Joe Holden says 4 to 5 days. Yeah, I think this does vary by market. And I think Bob's penchant for stretching that out a bit and make sure he's on time is probably very well founded. Which brings us, because Bob mentioned it, I'll jump right into it and make everyone aware of this document. Oh, wait. Should have done that. You were seeing it already. This document is available to realtors Utah-wide, the Request for Homeowner Community Association for Documentation. By the way, I feel like if you feel like there's going to be a problem, if you feel like you're getting some pushback, I'd highly recommend you start using this document. This document puts a little umph behind the request. Okay, and it's also signed by your sellers, you'll notice. So this is just a pre-formatted letter for your seller in order to request documentation from their own homeowners association. And it also says, hey, please advise, the association has 5 days to comply from the receipt of this notice. And then it requests all the appropriate stuff. Yeah, this can be a problem. And I think these are the things that we should attempt to start to gather for ourselves before we put it on the property or put it on the market. Not always possible, but I would say that this should be one of your goals. Scott says, here's why I would never accept over 5 days. I am not scheduling an inspection until I see seller's disclosure. Yeah, those are important things to factor in. You don't want to do, ideally you wouldn't want to do an inspection until you've seen those seller's property condition disclosures. So anyway, make sure that you are utilizing this when and if you need to. It could just be standard practice for you. Just if you know they're in a homeowners association, this is part of your paperwork. You get a listing agreement signed, you get affiliated business disclosure, wire fraud, and then you just throw this in the back and just have them check the boxes, sign it, and then you can have them deliver it, or you can deliver it yourself. Doug says, our friends at Metro will provide all those fancy docs on their summary PDF with hyperlinks. I have that ready as soon as I get listing paperwork. I agree with Scott. That is a really great point. For those of you who aren't using that, and I don't know because I'm almost exclusively using Metro, I don't know what the other ones are doing, but what she's saying, what Doug is saying by those hyperlinks is you can click on the things that are encumbering the property and see the document itself that is encumbering the property. And in this instance, we're talking about CC&Rs or whatever else is recording on that property. You have the automatic link to it, and thus you are delivering those things in your seller's disclosures as well. Sherry asks, what about when HOA companies are requiring a payment for the info? I'm sure others have ran into this. Yeah, I think this is on your sellers. I mean, we can help them navigate this issue, but I don't think in almost any circumstance you want to be the one handing over a credit card for this information. And also, you don't really have much standing there. Well, you do, but you want your sellers to go make that run and argue about the fees and find that info. That's on them.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah, take it
Hey,
away,
Mike.
Doug.
Doug Park. Hey, the majority of transactions I deal with do have HOAs, and I will say that down in Salt Lake, I agree with whoever put that comment in terms of some HOAs charge for those docs. I was just going to throw out, I mean, the only HOA I've ever run into, for the most part, that charged for those documents, who provided a digital repository to fee, was Daybreak. Over the time I took researching, my sellers have part of their HOA fees is they pay for access to those, because my understanding is legally they can't restrict the owners within the HOA from accessing their own documents. So I would, in your advice, is go through the sellers. They should have access for free to those documents.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I mean, it does seem ridiculous that you're paying a management company and they in turn turn around and charge you for things that should be readily available on a website with the link at all times. Seems pretty easy. I mean, it sort of reminds me of how cities should handle their city council meetings and all their documents and their recordings. It just should just be up there, and you shouldn't have to go searching and crawling around for it. So, so good, very good. The other thing and when we talk about this quite a bit, the commitment for title insurance, I think that's sort of one of the things that you should request right away when you start working on a property. That's one of the first things that we need to get after and request our title insurance policies. I think we're all really good at that. Let's talk about agreements affecting the property. We talked about, so it says a copy of any long-term tenant lease or rental agreements affecting the property not expiring prior to closing, and a copy of any short-term rental booking schedule for guest use of the property after closing. And a copy of any existing property management agreements. That seems pretty standard practice. I think sometimes in the short-term rental booking things, I think I've seen a few of those fall pretty short where they're just saying, hey, we're just working through Airbnb and they're not really providing a really good accounting of that. Make sure that you are paying attention to those things as they come over. On I, evidence of any water rights and or water shares referenced in section 1.4. We discussed this briefly a couple huddles ago, where one of our agents was listing a property and had seen, and this property had sold 4-ish years ago, and had seen in the listing on utahrealestate.com that they, the last listing agent had referenced water shares, or maybe, no, I think it was water rights. They referenced water rights in their listing agreement. And so the current owner had no recollection of that and was not aware of any of those things. And so we had to take it upon ourselves to go do some due diligence to actually track down if there was any information related to that. So yeah, they need to do some work on that and they just can't ignore it. So be aware of that. And let's see, let's do, let's jump over to the warranties that are closely associated with this in your listing agreement. So this is your listing agreement, and I had it right where I wanted it to be. Oh, there we go. Paragraph 4, and you'll notice this is our Berkshire Hathaway exclusive right to sell listing agreement. And in paragraph 4, we have an entire paragraph devoted to sellers, warranties, and disclosures. So let's read through that real quick. The seller warrants to the company that the individuals or entity listed above and the seller represents all of the record owners of the property. The seller warrants that the seller has marketable title and established right to sell, lease, or exchange the property. The seller agrees to execute the necessary documents of conveyance. The seller agrees to furnish buyer with good and marketable title and to pay at settlement for a policy of title insurance in accordance with the terms of any real estate purchase contract entered into between buyer and seller. Seller agrees to fully inform the seller's agent regarding the seller's knowledge of the condition of the property. Upon signing of this listing agreement, the seller agrees to personally complete and sign a company-approved seller's property condition disclosure form and a wire fraud alert disclosure. The seller agrees to indemnify and hold harmless the seller's agent and the company against any claims that may arise from A, the seller's property, including, but not limited to, the condition of all appliances, the condition of heating, plumbing, and electrical fixtures and equipment, sewer problems, moisture, or any other problems in the roof or foundation, the availability and location of utilities and the location of the property lines, and any injuries resulting from any unsafe conditions within the property. Those are pretty big guarantees and disclosures. And I think when you're giving your listing, when you're signing this paperwork, you should spend some time and focus on that paragraph because they are guaranteeing that they are going to share issues about the property with you. And I think if you've been in this business long enough, your seller has lied or concealed or hid conditions of the property from you. And if they're doing that, it doesn't matter that they've done it. You're going to be pulled into the quagmire right along with them. So make sure you're reading that paragraph really clearly to them and understand that it's our job. We have to disclose this stuff. We all know that we have to disclose everything we know about the property, and so does the seller by law. So this is a good way to help remind them of their requirements under the law about sellers' disclosures. Because I think sometimes we do get it backwards. I think all of us know, and I think, by the way, this paragraph 4, if I'm not mistaken, is pretty standard language in most listing agreements. And so they're already guaranteeing to disclose everything they know. And I think we talked about this a few huddles back where, flippers or family trusts are saying we're not going to fill something out. And that's not necessarily the way to handle that. So does anybody have any questions on those 2 items before we jump into seller's disclosures? Okay. Give me just a second, because for some reason I do not have the right document open, and I thought I was prepared. There we go. We're going to review this seller's disclosure document, and we're just going to talk about the main stuff, the big stuff. We won't deep dive into this as we've done on occasion. We have gone through this line by line once or twice, but it does take a few days to do that, and we're not going to do that this time. So we're gonna try to do the brief version of this. So by the way, there's a couple things that have come up lately. One of them is a really good example. An agent is the trustee of this home. Parents are incapacitated, can't make decisions for this, and the agent doesn't really have any real knowledge of the condition of this home, and but their parents have lived in this home for a very long time. So my advice is always, we still fill this out and we provide as much disclosure about the situation as possible and explain it in plain language that, I'm a trustee. My parents aren't able to fill out this document. To the best of my knowledge, I filled it out as best I could. Kind of provide some background in an email, what have you, before you fill these things out. So anyway, let's jump into it. Ownership. This should be pretty easy. How long have you owned the property? Have you occupied it or non-occupied it? And then, of course, they got to disclose if the property is being used or has been used as a rental. And then, by the way, you also have, during the time the seller has owned the property, has the property ever been rented or leased? And then you have to disclose those items. This one, paragraph 2, additions, remodels, and completions. I think a lot of people skip over a lot of this because, a lot of us think of stuff as paint, like I paint a room or whatever, and that isn't necessarily something to be disclosed. And you know what? You'd be right. It says, with the exception of cosmetic upgrades to the property, such as carpet, paint, and wallpaper, have you remodeled, made any room additions, made structural modifications, or any alterations to the property? Essentially saying, yeah, we don't have to disclose that we put new carpet in. You do have to disclose we put new carpet in because of a flood. Leslie says, if you have an ADU on the property, how do you disclose that properly? I'm thinking of a basement apartment. So I think there is a spot in this document to help us disclose that. But regardless or irregardless, depending on what part of the state you live in, regardless, you can also fill out paragraph 1C if the property or any portion of it currently being used in a rental. So that would be a portion of your property because your property is the legal description, not necessarily the structures. So you could rent a corner of your property so someone can park their car there, and you would need to disclose that, if that makes sense. Okay. So when we talk about, again, jumping to additions, remodels, or completions, we're talking about structural items here. And so you do need to disclose those things. Were any permits issued? Yeah, that's a tough one. Who gets a permit these days? Well, everybody should. Who does is maybe another question for another time. To your knowledge, did any former owners make any additions, structural changes, or alterations to the property? even rumors count here. Like if you heard a rumor of a prior owner doing something, you need to write that down. And you can even say, I don't know for a fact, I don't have any evidence of it, but this is what I heard, because you do have to pass that stuff along. To your knowledge, did any property managers or tenants make any addition, structural changes, or alteration of the property? Same thing there. Use of property. Are you aware of any past or present non-conforming or illegal uses of the property, such as renting the property in violation of local zoning laws or renting the property without a business license where such licenses are required? Which is kind of like, you have to have a license to rent your property. You have to renew it every year. And if you're like me, you forgot almost every single year. Somehow I managed to forget all the time. Are you aware of any existing or threatened legal action affecting the property? That should be pretty obvious. And then they talk about any violations of state law or whatever. Roof. These ones seems pretty easy, right? Are we aware of any roof leaks? You should know about that. How did you fix it? These are the things that I think as we go along, especially like I sold a rental about 4 months ago. And as I'm going along, I'm remembering, my memory is coming back and go, oh yeah, I had an ice dam build up and I got a leak from that. And my remedy was just to clear the ice dam and repaint. And then nothing ever happened for the next 15 years. But if you do actually have to get something fixed, it's good practice and good thing to advise your clients. Save that paperwork so we have reference to actually made the repairs. Because those things, for whatever reason, property changed hands, they always come back to bite us. So paperwork. Other than leaks, are you aware of any past or present problems or defects of the roof, structural issues, dry rot, moisture, ice damage, etc.? And then of course, has it been repaired or replaced? These ones are kind of basic. Are you aware of any problems with utility service of the property or with any utility service systems? A good example of this, this paragraph includes natural gas, electricity, phone, TV, internet. A good example of this is my parents live on a street that is a dead-end street that's off of kind of a larger street, and they have power outages at a frequency that is significantly greater than I do, and that is something that, believe it or not, you should probably disclose. That I have, and the power outage is so great that most of the homes have backup natural gas generators. So that's something you need to disclose, right? That you're dealing with real utility issues there. Culinary water. This is the stuff. Name of government entity, water service. Just refer them to maybe a website link or whatnot with your local city. And if you don't know the water company and you have secondary or whatever water, they need to track that down. Like, this is not something that we can just go, hey, look, I do have it, and this is the name of the water company, and then leave it blank. You need to fill out contact information and provide documentation in this spot. Okay. Private water rights, wells or spring presently located on the property. By the way, I haven't dealt with this in a very long time. Has anybody dealt with a well, right? And what kind of documentation are you providing for your well if it's in the middle of a field somewhere? If anybody has that knowledge, throw it in the chat or unmute yourself. And then it says, to your knowledge, what is the state engineer's assigned water right number for your water right? If they don't know this is the stuff we track down before we list the property, by the way. Irrigation and secondary water, usually this is on their bill and something that's easily discoverable. So not a very difficult issue. Again, got to provide all that great contact information, and same goes with same information there just for that. Sewer septic tank. This I think all of us are going to deal with this issue almost no matter where you're at along the Wasatch Front or in the entire state of Utah. You're going to work markets with septic tanks. So are you aware of any past or present problems, including service and components, broken sewer lines, Yada yada. I think the best thing to do is a lot of people do have obviously people coming and doing regular service on their septic tanks. So I think that could be disclosure enough. Just provide a record of their service of the sewer and septic tank. Heating and cooling. Are you aware of any past or present problems with any heating or air conditioning equipment, components, or systems? For example, baseboard heating doesn't work. Inadequate forced air from the specific vent. Some of these older homes do have those baseboard heatings that no longer work and that have been painted over 6 times. Yeah, you need to disclose they don't work, by the way. Even though they were long past their life and you're getting a heat source from somewhere else, it's probably a good idea to disclose that. Equipment. Are you aware of any past or present problems? Air purifiers, audio systems, central vac, computer network, fire sprinkling, automatic garage door opener, humidifier, intercom, media. I mean, you get the point. Anything attached to your home, this stuff needs to be disclosed and talked about. And some good acceptance, smart home systems, or even security cameras. You know, I mean, all those things need to have some line items if there's some problems there. Appliance section, fireplace, stoves. Those are all pretty self-explanatory. Interior. So interior, we're talking about ceiling fans, dumbwaiters. Haven't seen a dumbwaiter in a hot minute. Elevator, flooring, jetted bathtubs, indoor pool, spa, steam shower, you name it. Exterior and exterior features. So these would be stuff that's in the backyard. So like a gas barbecue, a hot tub, sprinkling system, rain gutters, those types of things. So in my instance, I talked about an ice dam. Those are the things that even though that I disclose that as a roof leak, I also disclose that as a rain gutter issue, right? Termites, dry rot, pest. I do have friends that constantly have had bats in their attic. And then later on in the same attic, they had a trash panda. So yeah, those things need to be disclosed. Rodents, pests, termites, those types of things. Structural items and soil. Are you aware of any settlement or heaving of soil on the property or any adjoining property? These can get, so example, collapsible or expansive soils, poorly compacted fill. Also, these are worth reading. Are you aware of any sliding or earth movement on the property or any adjoining property, landslides, falling rocks, debris, or mud flows? Boundaries and easements. I think it was just our last huddle where we discovered and outed poor Peter Felis for his boundary line issue. That has been resolved. Congratulations, Peter. He is very likely going to a closing table, so congrats. Those things are a big deal. I think that's his example is a really good example of making sure you're double checking the state's GIS system, parcel maps, overlays, and if there are any discrepancies, make sure you point them out to your clients so they can do their due diligence on them. Electrical mold, other moisture conditions, hazardous conditions. So hazardous conditions, so this is interesting, with the exception of meth, which I think there's a separate meth disclosure here. Are you aware of any past or present hazardous conditions, substances, or materials on the property, such as asbestos, lead-based paint, methane gas, radon gas, radioactive or toxic materials, unreformaldehyde foam? I don't actually know what that is. Buried storage tanks and lines. And then it's got its own line item. To your knowledge, is the property currently contaminated from the use, storing, or manufacturing of methamphetamines? I think we all know this, but it's you will notice, is the property currently contaminated from the use, storing, and manufacture of methamphetamines? This is one of those sort of touchy issues with meth. We get it remediated. Do we disclose? The bottom line is that you are not required to disclose the remediation of meth, but it is probably not a bad idea to think about it. We talked about homeowner stuff, so we're going to go ahead and skip that. PID. Scott says, nope. What are we noping to, Scott?
The disclosure of meth in the home previously. I would say that makes you actionable unless the seller told you to say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
it would certainly ruin a deal, and I've had people walk away knowing there was meth in there. So I don't see any reason to disclose that after the fact.
Oh, well, thank you for contributing. I'm glad you brought it up. That's a very good point. One, is it a good idea or not is a separate discussion from whether your seller gives you permission to do so. So thank you for pointing out the difference. Yeah, I mean, there's a really strong argument to be made that it is not in the seller's interest to disclose those things. But yeah, I kind of agree with that. There isn't a great there isn't a great reason to disclose those things. It's sort of like death or bad things happen on a property and becomes stigmatized kind of a thing. Thanks, Scott. Paragraph 23, PID, Public Infrastructure District. Are you aware of one? I think if you are, if you're living somewhere and they put one in, I think you're going to be pretty aware of it. But moving into one, you may not be so aware of it. Is anybody currently aware of a PID? I think there's one in Murray or somewhere going on right now or currently existing. But the PIDs aren't very common, but they do happen. So yeah, I need to disclose those. Unpaid assessments. These things can get tricky, especially with your HOA, where they have talked about assessments, but they have not planned for one, but it has come up in a meeting. You can you can insert all those documents, all those meeting minutes documents into AI and say, hey, has anybody ever mentioned a special assessment that might be talked about? FYI. Insurance. This is becoming a bigger and bigger one. In fact, I haven't read the headline, but I have saved it to go back and read. Insurance. During your ownership of the property, if you file an insurance claim based on loss or damage to the property, is property part of a condominium or homeowners association? Do you know if the HOA has filed any insurance claims for loss or damage? This is becoming a much bigger issue, so I want to put this on everybody's radar as much as we can. This should be, discovering the insurability of a property should be one of the first things that you do. We should be making calls to our insurance company saying, hey, can we do this? Because I have seen some Wasatch back emails going around because an insurance provider wouldn't do a certain neighborhood, and the Wasatch back community got together and go, that they may not, but here's 3 others that will. So this insurability thing is becoming a bigger and bigger factor. And I did see a headline, some expert or pundit or talking head said that there are sections of the country that, in the next 10-year-ish may not be insurable, which is scary, but we all know where those places are because we've talked about it quite a bit, or I have. Leslie asks, discovering insurability a listing agent job? Actually, it's a really great question. I would say that if there is a lien on the property, we can make a pretty good assumption that there is some insurance in place, but I would say no. That is not strictly our job. It's probably a good idea, though. When we talk about this, that does affect the sale ability of the property, if that's a good word. It does affect our ability to sell that property. If it's not insurable, I don't know really what we do, but primarily that is a buyer's agent job to make sure that gets done, or instruct our clients to go call your insurance company right away, make sure this is insurable. Really good question. But by the way, this does kind of bring up my recent experience with insurance. I recently, because car insurance is going up all the time, so I went and got a different quote with another company, and I saved a whole bunch of money. I was really happy. And then at the end of this, it was all online. I didn't talk to anybody because I was just, seeing what was out there. At the end, they said, by the way, here's a link to the things that affect your assurability as far as cars go. And I clicked on it, and it was essentially my insurance credit report, right? Like what has happened that would affect my insurability, not my credit score or credit report or anything that has to do with debt and income and all that. But it was highly inaccurate, by the way. And so there was 4 items on there, 3 of which did not happen and never existed. So I'm overpaying for car insurance because of these 3 phantom ghost incidents. And as I did some research, turns out that I'm going to have a heck of a time getting those removed and probably won't be successful. But I guarantee you the same thing happens. It's the same company managing and monitoring stuff going on with our real estate. Scott says, good question. If I am correct, you cannot get a mortgage unless you get insurance. So the buyer will find out quickly. Absolutely correct. That's one of the problems with having areas that aren't insurable. Only cash buyers can go in there, and would you even want to is actually a real question, right? Even if you have cash, do you want to be hanging out without insurance? I don't think I would. I mean, it'd have to be a very magical place, almost literal magic in that place. Not just the fantasy kind, literal magic. All right, moving on. Solar panels. Yeah, this is, I think we've kind of, I remember about 10-ish years ago, solar panels were just a conundrum. It was a hot mess. Feels like it's cleaned itself up pretty good lately. So I think we are pretty good at navigating our solar panel situation, and the solar panel industry has also adapted to make it easier. Alternate additional power systems. So in this instance, I told you about the street that my parents live on, and almost everybody on the street has a natural gas powered backup generator. And this is where you would disclose that. And yeah, you need to, talk about its components. Is it working well? And talk about that as you would any other system that's attached to the house. Additional disclosures. So, by the way, this is a really good time to talk about additional disclosures, because we have talked about that in the past, but for some reason, multiple times in the past 2 weeks, I've had situations where we have had to do an addendum to the seller's property condition disclosure. And so that is, if you're not aware, that is absolutely a thing, the addendum to the seller's property condition disclosure. And so this is just, the after the fact stuff, or if there's been significant alterations, let's say they did an entire remodel and there's a lot of things to talk about, move this wall, move that wall, threw in this, and, the list gets long, we can just do an addendum to this document. So be aware of that if they need to do it. And let's see, I think we've covered kind of the seller's disclosure stuff. Does anybody have any questions, anecdotes, jokes about seller's disclosures? We'd love to hear them. If not, we can move on. Oh, my chat went away. There we go.
Hey, Mike,
All
can I add
Yeah.
one to that?
Yeah, take it away, Dave.
We put two things under contract this week. One of them was I'll just tell you, one's a new property within the last 2 years in a neighborhood up in Park City. And my clients actually were taken back, offended. They wanted the sellers to redo the condition disclosures because they did not note a single item on that list. So it was clearly just it was another Berkshire agent, but on the seller side, but it was clearly just filled out on dot loop. There was not 1 ounce of anything added to that form, meaning that they said nothing about the actual condition of the property, to which my buyers were saying, come on, Doug, we know there's something on there.
Yeah.
So in the great words of Mark O'Brien, who talked about selling his home in Sandy a couple of years ago, he said, I absolutely err on the side of disclosing too much. And as a buyer's agent, I would far prefer to see things on there that had been corrected. So yeah. And that's actual experience from my buyers this week. They were, if you want to call it, calling BS on the sellers for the fact they didn't put anything on that disclosure sheet.
Yeah, I think that should be everyone's instinct when you receive clearly poorly filled out or poorly thought through disclosures. It feels like in my career, where I was chasing a lot of land deals early in my career, I was chasing land and development deals, and most of the land was owned by old timers, right? And that it had been in the family for generations, and their attitude seems pretty pervasive. I think a lot of people have it, is that, no, this is your problem. Like and I've had people say, well, why would I tell them? They need to find out for themselves. It's their problem. Once I say it's not my problem. And like the reminder is, this is state law. This isn't This isn't like buyer beware. It's buyer beware when you disclose everything. Until then, it's your responsibility. It's your liability. Ron says, from what I'm told, the multi-page disclosure is not required. You can use a napkin. Should we be requesting the UAR form is required on our REPC? Really great point, Ron. Ron is, in my opinion, correct on all accounts. That I think our problem is, well, actually, let me see this document. Who made the document? So the seller's property condition disclosures is a Utah Association of Realtors document. But the REPC is not a Utah real estate realtor document. So the REPC is a Utah Real Estate Commission document. So it's a state document, a state approved form. So I think that's where our lines are crossed there. But it's a pretty good idea. And yes, you can fill out the disclosures on a napkin. And in fact, I have seen relocation stuff done where a relocation company just has their own form and it's disclosure and they just send it and that's what it is. And that's disclosure, right? We can request, to Ron's comment, yes, we can go out of our way to request that specific document is filled out. Yeah, we can do that. It's a pretty good idea. And one of the great things of being a realtor is the organization, and we do have some expectation that we use better forms. And the seller's property condition disclosure to me is a better form, and it's been improved in the last few years, which I think it was a really good improvement. But it's definitely not required. So they can just take a napkin and say, hey, yeah, there's a flood in the basement in 1962. Good luck, and toss it at you. And it's your choice what to do with that information. And in Doug's case, yeah, I think it's appropriate to push back and say this isn't good enough. But even the act of pushing back alone is in some sense disclosure, because if we don't get anything, we at least get an explanation, potentially an explanation or a reaction to our pushback that might be valuable. So, they may have filled it out and then we say, they just sign it and there's nothing filled out. And we push back on that information. They're like, well, yeah, we bought it, but we've never actually been there and we forgot about it because we're so wealthy that we don't care about expensive real estate. And maybe that's the truth, right? But at least we have that answer as opposed to just a blank form that doesn't explain anything. Leslie asks, is it out of line to ask for previous disclosures? Definitely not out of line. I would say that we should always ask. The worst thing they're going to tell us is no, or we don't have it. I mean, out of line is my line is way out there, like way out there. You have to be way out there to be out of my lines, because asking, like, who cares? It's just a question. You can just tell me no. So yeah, you can ask. You can ask. I don't think very many people have those. I mean, if you think about the packets, well, everybody should have them, but no one's keeping them. I mean, I'm in real estate and I throw all that stuff. I don't throw it all away, but throw a lot of it away. Good question though. It's 11:46. Let's see. What are my other subject here? Hey, let's talk about, oh, well, this is closely related. Let's go over the buyer's due diligence checklist really quick and review that and talk about how we need to integrate this, because we are talking about seller's disclosures and why those are important. And so you just jump to the other side of this issue, and it's the buyer due diligence checklist. I think most of us are reviewing this with our buyer clients. I think all of us should be reviewing this with our buyer clients because it's really, really important. This should go right along with your review of your buyer's agency disclosure. And we won't, unless it, by the way, if you have any comments on this, throw them in the chat or just unmute yourself and let's talk about it. Building codes, zoning compliance. So these would be things that, if there's a lot of real estate out there that's labeled, that's zoned commercial, but it's just a single family home. And it became that because it's on a major thoroughfare. Well, it wasn't a major thoroughfare in 1954. Something like that is worth jumping into and seeing what's happening there. Nothing dramatic will hardly ever come of that, but at least they understand what kind of situation they're getting into. Rental of property. This is a big one and it becoming a bigger issue all the time. If people intend to buy stuff for rent, especially short-term rentals, they better make sure they have explicit approval from the people who can approve it before they jump into that, because cities and HOAs and everybody is cracking down on that in many areas. So make sure you have that discussion. Hazardous waste and toxic substances. Really we're talking about meth and radon. That's really what we're talking about mostly, but there could be other things. I mean, if you're looking at land or looking at a development deal, a phase one environmental assessment will very likely come with it. And if it doesn't and they intend to develop, you should not go to a closing table without a clean phase one environmental assessment, just FYI. And then here we're talking explicitly about radon gas. Surveying, staking, usually not, single family homes and the like, probably not necessary. But if we're buying a piece of land, probably a really good idea to talk about that. Home warranty plans, I think we cover that really well. Flood zone and insurance. I tell this story all the time. Way back in the day when I was not very smart, I bought a rental property. I won't even say it was in Richfield. I shouldn't have bought it, but it was a special situation and I bought it. It was a disaster. But the bottom line was I went to a closing table and they go, oh, by the way, you're in a flood zone and you're going to owe an additional like $400 a month for insurance. Turns out it wasn't in a flood zone and the city had already prepared a letter explaining, in fact, no, we are not in a flood zone. And it's an error that is trying to be corrected for a while now. So, again, this is insurability. So these are the first things we should do. Homeowners insurance, we talked about that. Title issues, homeowners association, physical condition. I think we handle that really well. Square footage, acreage. We don't verify square footage. They can reference appraisals and the county for that stuff, but we do not provide those services. Utility services. If it's working, great. But if you're buying a piece of land, that's actually can be a difficult thing to discover. You can get maps of where the utilities are from utility companies, but it's a hassle. If you're buying a piece of land and they go, yeah, utilities are available. Are they though? Because that's a subjective term. Available can be subjective, and it's always subjective for the seller and dollars and cents to the buyer. Water, that's utility services too. Geologic conditions, mold, housing compliance, property taxes, PIDs, FERPTA, income, legal tax consequences, and the like, and energy efficiency. Has anybody ever actually had somebody ask them about the energy efficiency and go to EnergyStar.gov? I mean, Energy Star. That's just so bizarre to me. I guess I'm not really tracking on that one. But anyway, that's a thing. You should be aware of it. Those are closely associated. And by the way, it's 1:51. I do have 2 or 3 other subjects that take a lot more than 9 minutes to discuss. Does anybody have any questions, comments, any issues? Transactional issues. Come on, give me something. Somebody's got to have a major problem that I can talk about. Leslie, I feel like you're ready to say something. See, I knew it. You were unclicking, weren't you?
I did.
I looked, there's only like 3 videos, and I looked at you and you were like, you're thinking about it. What do you got?
I just wanted to speak to, I have had 3 cancellations in the last 2 weeks, 2-ish weeks, maybe it's getting closer to 3 now. And I just wanted to see what everybody else what their sense was. And 2 of the 3 have been due diligence inspection items that we haven't been able to negotiate to the buyer's satisfaction. So we have canceled. And then one of them was we had a subject to sale and it wasn't going to happen. So we had to cancel that deal. But any thoughts from anybody else on here as far as what you're seeing? Are you seeing? I don't know. Just thought I'd ask.
So, yeah, I think what you're getting at is you're asking if anybody has noticed any market trends of any abnormal amount of cancellation of deals. It's a good question. Um,
Well, I read an article, actually posted on my Instagram yesterday about it, but that it's for the month of January, cancellations are up like 14.3% nationwide. So I thought it was interesting. It hit me because I have had the three, and so anyway, just wondered.
yeah, Scott says statistically, cancellations are near all-time highs, according to some on social media. Doug says one canceled yesterday, but no for
Not for you.
not for due
Okay.
diligence. Yeah, I mean, just so for everybody's perspective, and because I've seen the insider view of a large number of transactions and their cancellation rates. On any given year, I've seen as low as 15% cancellation rates, all the way up to almost 20% in some years. So there is a flow to them. I don't know that I've ever, I know I've never seen a really good statistical breakdown or causality of all that. Never seen that. But I just know that there is a fluctuation there. I mean, and honestly, when someone says, wait, somebody said, if it was you that said there's a 20% increase. So, I mean,
14%.
that might still be in my range of the things I've seen over the last, 10 to 12 years. Oh, good stuff. Scott just posted a
Oh,
pic
there
of
you go.
cancellation. Yeah, I mean, these things, so we're at 14 home builder cancellation rate at full. Oh, so this is just for new construction, which is pretty dang valuable though. 14%. So that's a big jump. Especially, that's just up to 2022, but that's a really good perspective. So it looks like new construction cancels at a rate that is significantly less than the market itself. So that's pretty
Well,
good.
yeah, because they keep your money.
Yeah, they do. um, uh, there's a couple, and by the way, for those who aren't seeing, there's a couple of really cool graphs Scott has posted in there. Doug says 10 properties put back on the market in Park City the last 7 days. Unsure what prior weeks look like, just pulling from Park City's hot sheets. So yeah, seems like you're not the only one experiencing that right now. I do feel like that did also happen in my office, and I haven't gone and looked at the numbers, but just from the number of under contract deals that we saw in January in relation to the actual closings in February. But sometimes that bleeds over into the next month. But yeah, it seemed like it was abnormally high. And these do fluctuates. They ebb and flow, and so yeah.
I guess just for me, because I've only been doing real estate for 5 years. And of course, those 5 years were unicorn years. And so for me to have just three boom, boom, boom like that, I was like, okay, is there something to this? So,
Well, I would say the poker player in me would tell you that that's just variation. Standard variations of your probable outcomes, and yeah, sometimes
okay.
you're gonna get some months you're just gonna get hit over the head really hard, and there's no reason for it. It's just because you've decided to hustle out there, Leslie, and somebody somewhere has decided that sometimes you need to be punished. Joe says,
Thanks. Thanks for that
"Hey,
encouragement.
I'd like to, I'd like to say it's otherwise, but I feel like somebody somewhere is like, look at they're smiling a little too much lately." Joe says you are all done. It comes in threes. Well,
Thank you, Joe.
he said you're done, and I kind of agree. There is something about that when I talk to agents who are, kind of getting hit over the head like you are. Like I'm just like, I think you're getting it out of the way.
Hopefully.
There's got to be some pain to this. There's got to be a little pain. All right, y'all. It's 1:57. Thanks so much for coming and participating. And I think next week, I don't know exactly, but I think next week we have our luncheon. So we may not be on board next week, but the week after we're back on. Ron says, seems to me that new construction would cancel due to financing resale. Yeah, probably financing and resale. Yeah, I would agree with that because it is hard to get that money back from once you give it to them. So, yeah, their financing would have to fail. All right, thanks for coming, y'all.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.